The Chinese Communist Party's centralized control is threatened by fintechs and e-commerce giants. Not surprisingly, the regime has started regulation in these areas. In a 1,000-year-old Chinese Buddhist temple, monks are not studying Buddhist scriptures. They are studying Xi Jinping's scriptures. The World Health Organization censored the word Taiwan in its social media account. The U.S. meanwhile praised the island as a model of democracy. A financial blow to the Chinese Communist Party's military. U.S. President Trump signed an order preventing American investors from funding China's military companies. And China has taken over more than 100 UK companies in key areas of national security and infrastructure. The UK is taking action against the infiltration before it's too late. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Chinese Communist regime issued an anti-monopoly guideline to regulate e-commerce giants and fintechs. Experts say it's because these companies pose a threat to Beijing's centralized financial control.
Beijing is starting to wage war against e-commerce giants. Last week, the country's General Administration of Market Regulation issued a draft of an anti-monopoly guideline on the e-commerce sector, claiming its purpose is to prevent and stop monopolistic practices of such platforms. The stock price for these platforms dropped by 5 to even more than 10% right after the announcement. The University of South Carolina-Aiken professor in business Frank Xi thinks it's funny for the CCP regime to talk about anti-monopoly, because if any of the monopoly exists, it's the CCP that nurtured them.
These Chinese internet companies were given a monopoly status by the Chinese Communist Party back then. In order to nurture these private enterprises under their control, the regime uses national power to expel their American peers. For example, Alibaba versus Amazon, Alipay versus PayPal, and Baidu versus Google, etc.
Just days before the announcement, 3 ministries in charge of market regulation, internet information technology, and tax administration called a meeting for 27 major e-commerce platforms. Ministry officials warned them to comply with the law and maintain self-restraint. Xi Huawei is a financial advisor from the Bank of Communications of China. He's calling the move a redistribution of interests.
I think it's just to divide benefits. The regime probably didn't get a share of that cake because it was previously divided up. This guideline is a redistribution menu.
It's widely believed that Beijing's recent move against Ant Financial Group, an affiliate of the Alibaba Group, is the same kind of signal. A recent report says Xi Jinping personally halted Ant's record-breaking $37 billion IPO. That's after controlling shareholder Jack Ma snubbed regime leaders.
These financial high-tech companies are starting to threaten the CCP's position over the financial and banking sectors because they're running the banks with an internet business model. They're taking in money and doing banking, but we cannot call it a bank.
A Financial Times editorial expressed a similar opinion. It said financial technology companies like Ant Group pose a threat to Beijing's centralized control, and that the move may have lasting implications for fintech regulations. Reporting by Chen Han, Shu Wenhui, NTD News.
Under China's authoritarian regime, a 1,000-year-old temple is no longer a place of worship. Instead, it's become a place to venerate Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping.
The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, is undermining Chinese people's freedom of religion. A few days ago, the abbot of a Chinese temple, the Da-Chi-En Temple, organized for all Buddhist monks to diligently study Xi Jinping's speech from a key party conference. A monk from the temple told us their study of the speech is to maintain a high degree of alignment with the policies of the regime.
I don't have a lot of experience in this. I will continue to study and deepen my understanding. There are rules in the temple. All activities must be unified. If the temple arranges something, you must actively participate.
The chairman of the Taiwan Tibet Religious Foundation told us that in China, state authority supersedes that of religious monks.
Because in China it is the authority of the regime above all else, unlike Tibet or India, where religious authority overrides secular power. For example, in Thailand the king is very powerful, yet he still bows in front of monks when he meets them. It's like this in India, and it was like this in Tibet before as well.
China's Daqian Temple is located in northern China's Xi'an city. It's a world-famous Buddhist temple with a history of more than 1,300 years.
Now to China's northern Hebei province. A cotton factory there exploded on Thursday. According to China media, the blast killed 7 people and left 1 injured. The factory building was completely destroyed. Residential areas were also shaken by the incident. The force of the explosion smashed glass windows in some nearby houses. The accident's cause is still unknown. Now we turn to Shanghai. On Wednesday, official reports show no virus cases have been found in the city. But a notice circulating online tells a different story. It claims a college student in Shanghai was diagnosed with fever on Tuesday. On Wednesday, he was confirmed to be infected with the CCP or Chinese Communist Party virus. That evening, local authorities began monitoring those who had recent contact with him. They also issued cleaning orders for places the patient visited. A Shanghai citizen told us that the college student is her son's classmate. She said all students there have been put under quarantine and cannot leave campus. They've also been tested for the virus and are waiting for the results. Back in late October, online rumors spread that virus cases had emerged in one Shanghai neighborhood. Authorities denied the claim, but they also upgraded local prevention and control measures. The contradictory response left some local residents questioning whether authorities were concealing the truth. And in Hubei province on Thursday, Luotian County suddenly announced it was entering wartime status immediately, while claiming there was no locally confirmed cases of the CCP virus. Luotian County is located in the same province as Wuhan, the origin of the CCP virus. A resident from the county told us he considered it impossible that the authorities issued a wartime status without having any confirmed cases.
There possibly are cases of infection, but they haven't made it public. They haven't reported it. Then they remind the public to be vigilant through the notice.
He added it doesn't make sense that there are so many cases around the world continuing to emerge, but only in China there are supposedly just a handful of cases from abroad. One of China's major port cities, Tianjin, has reported a local case of the virus. The infected patient works in a frozen food factory. Chinese officials claim to have detected the virus on frozen pork packaging imported from Germany. As a result, they are calling German pork to be the origin of the case. But Germany's Federal Ministry of Agriculture refuted the allegation, saying there has been no precedent of infection from eating or coming in contact with contaminated meat and meat products. The ministry authorized the German Federal Institute of Animal Health to conduct research on how susceptible animals are to the virus. Results show that pigs, chickens, ducks, and turkeys can't contract the sickness, and that the virus duplications in cows are not transmissible to humans or other animals. Now we turn to the World Health Organization. The WHO's Facebook page is found to have blocked Taiwan-related messages. Taiwan's Premier Tseng-chang criticized the censorship and said it's a sign of the CCP's lack of confidence. Taiwan was not invited to the World Health Assembly this week due to the CCP's obstruction. On top of that, netizens found that the WHO's Facebook page blocks any posts with the keywords Taiwan can help. Netizens thus started to be creative with their posts. They used symbols in place of words, trying to get their message through. When reporters asked Taiwan's premier of his view on the censorship, Su pointed out that Taiwan has the best epidemic prevention and control. He said, quote, Taiwan is most willing to share this information with the world, and many WHO member states are very positive on Taiwan. A U.S.-based Taiwan ambassador tested out the WHO Facebook page to prove the censorship does exist. She tweeted a screenshot and criticized the WHO for taking on the Chinese Communist Party's habit of censorship. The WHO responded on Thursday, saying their Facebook page was under mass cyber attacks by keywords such as Taiwan, and filters were added to block these messages. They say the block is now removed. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo stressed Washington's bipartisan commitment to Taiwan on Thursday. He said Taiwan has not been part of China. His comments came during an interview with American radio host Hugh Hewitt. Pompeo stressed Taiwan is a model of democracy and reiterated the U.S. will honor its commitment to the island nation. He said the U.S. will continue to honor that distinction, which was recognized during the Reagan administration. Pompeo added the U.S. has adhered to these policies for 3.5 decades. He pointed out recent weapon sales between the U.S. and Taiwan. The weapons are said to help the island defend itself against the potential attacks from China. Taiwan's presidential office echoed Pompeo's statement on Thursday that Taiwan is a sovereign and independent country. China's foreign ministry responded, saying China would hit back against any moves by the U.S. that undermine its core interest. Taiwan is a sensitive topic for China, which considers the island part of its own. Taiwan, meanwhile, staunchly maintains its independence. President Trump signed an executive order that will deal a financial blow to the Chinese Communist Party's military. The order prevents American investors from funding Chinese Communist military companies, which the Trump administration says is key to developing the CCP's military-industrial complex. The president stated in his executive order that the CCP is increasingly exploiting U.S. capital to resource and to enable the development and modernization of its military. He said it continues to allow the communist regime to directly threaten the U.S. at home and abroad, including U.S. weapons of mass destruction and advanced conventional weapons. The CCP's national strategy of military-civil fusion increases the size of the country's military-industrial complex by compelling the Chinese private sector to support its military. According to the executive order, on January 11th of next year, any transaction between a United States person and a communist Chinese military company will be outlawed. A U.S. university professor pleaded guilty for sharing federally funded medical research with China. The professor is linked to pro-Beijing Chinese groups in the U.S.
A university professor is pleading guilty to illegally using federal funding to help China enhance its biomedical research. He faces up to 5 years in prison. That's according to the Justice Department. Song Guozheng was a professor of internal medicine at Ohio State University. When he applied for $4 million in grants from the taxpayer-funded National Institute of Health, Zheng did not disclose his employment with the Chinese university. Zheng is part of China's so-called Thousand Talents program. Through the talent recruitment project, China hires top U.S. scientists from universities and biotech firms to teach in Chinese universities or work in Chinese labs. Many of them, like Zheng, receive U.S. federal funding for their research. A Chinese state media report shows that the professor also held multiple positions in pro-Beijing Chinese groups in California when he was working as a professor at the University of Southern California. That includes the vice president of Chinese American Federation and the chairman of the Association of Chinese Scholars and Students from the Chinese province of Anhui. When the latter group was established in 2011, the Chinese State Council published a press release to announce it. According to the DOJ, Zheng was arrested in May in Alaska when he was about to board a charter flight and flee to China. That's after he learned that his American employer is investigating him. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
American thought leaders interviewed General Robert Spalding, where he spoke about the impact the Chinese Communist Party has on America. He said the entire premise of 2020 has been about the Chinese Communist Party.
Robert Spalding, a retired Air Force Brigadier General and senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, said this entire year has been dominated by the actions of the Chinese Communist Party because 2020 has really been about the coronavirus. He said that the CCP enabled the spread of the virus through international air travel when they blocked domestic air travel within China. He said the CCP locked down PPE masks around the world, put pressure on the World Health Organization to not talk about human-to-human transmission, encouraged panic on social media, and spread disinformation that the virus originated from the United States and Spain.
What does it have to do with the CCP? Why did we have massive mail-in ballots? Because of the coronavirus. Why do we have the coronavirus? Because of the Chinese Communist Party. When you add all of these things together, the actions by the Chinese Communist Party deliberately impacted the U.S. election.
He went on to say that the actions of the CCP promoted a narrative that the U.S. wasn't handling the pandemic well compared to China, putting the blame on President Trump rather than on the CCP, who was responsible for spreading it to the United States. According to Spalding, the cultural, political, and academic landscape with things like critical race theory and social justice programs mirrors that of the oppressive communist regime in China.
We are, in 2020, in the midst of a people's war waged by the Chinese Communist Party around the world to essentially destroy liberalism. And in many ways, we're cooperating because we censor ourselves. I could look at the United States and see many of the same things that were happening in China. In other words, widespread censorship, widespread oppression of views. In other words, there's only one truth, and it's the truth of the Chinese Communist Party issues. And if you have another opinion, then you're isolated.
Spalding said that the intelligence community and journalists may dispute the party's impact on the world because there's no hard paper trail. But he said the CCP is one of the most secretive organizations in the world that would never telegraph what they were doing unless there was a major crisis in the country. According to him, knowing how the CCP operates, the link between the regime and 2020 is very clear. Unlike American legacy media and other countries, Russia and China have not yet congratulated Joe Biden for being named president-elect by the media.
They both understand that in America, you still have rule of law. And they saw in 2000 that there was a disputed election for 37 days. Somebody was promoted as the president-elect, and then on the 37th day, we had somebody else.
Spalding said that he thinks China and Russia are hedging their bets and waiting for the results to play out. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Now we move to the UK. According to London-based think tank, the Henry Jackson Society, known as HJS, Chinese companies have taken over or partly taken over around 120 British companies over the past decade. An HJS database shows these companies are distributed in key sectors. That includes defense, aviation, semiconductors, information, finance, as well as other firms that serve the UK's critical infrastructure. These sectors have been cited by the Chinese Communist Party as key to Beijing's Made in China 2025 strategy. The plan aims to push China's manufacturing capacity so it dominates global high-tech production. The HJS database was revealed after the UK's National Security and Investment Bill was released on Wednesday. The bill consolidates the government's investigation and intervention powers around malicious corporate deals involving national security concerns. The bill will compel companies to disclose any potentially hostile attempts to direct foreign investment in key corporate sectors, especially defense, artificial intelligence, robotics, energy, and computing. Now we turn to viewer comments after watching our three-part series Surviving 7 Years in Chinese Prison, focused on forced labor. Many viewers commented. Some asked what's wrong with prison labor, since the practice exists in U.S. prisons too. It is true that the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution allows forced labor in the U.S. prisons as a punishment for crime, and some groups are calling for reform of the prison industry in the U.S. Still, there's a key difference between the situation in the U.S. and in China. Millions of inmates in China's prisons, labor camps, and other detention facilities have not committed any crime, but are held as prisoners of conscience. They belong to persecuted groups like Falun Gong, Uyghur Muslims, House Christians, or democracy activists. Most of them were arbitrarily detained. Others had just a sham trial without any due process. Many of them suffered torture and other forms of abuse. And as an independent tribunal last year concluded, a substantial number of prisoners of conscience in China have been killed for their organs. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you next time.